Everquest, the MMO player's MMO. It's hard. I figured with the new servers coming out this year, I'd finally throw my hat into the ring of trying to educate players to the best of my ability, so that way they can join us and have fun and commit to the community. But it requires a bit of a preamble in that classes don't fall into the typical Trinity. That happened later. You do have the Holy Trinity, but there's also non-healing supports. There are classes that don't tank DPS or heal, but still provide tremendous group utility. I would like to, at some point, provide a more in-depth guide for every class, and as well as racial selections. But this is my short, sweet guide to help you choose the perfect Everquest class for you. And once you find one that sounds nice to you, you can find more information either from me or other community members such as Ion Blaze. Thank you very much for watching. Warrior. Roles: tank DPS. Solo, weak. Grouping, moderate. Raid, very strong. Special notes: scales extremely heavily with gear. The de facto hard tank of Everquest, boasting unrivaled raw HP coupled with very strong mitigation. Extremely hard to solo with unless twinked, and sadly of questionable value in a group setting. However, in a raid setting, the results of a warrior are very hard to replace. After stockpiling gear and items, their versatility and power skyrockets, but be aware they'll never reach the level of solo ability that some other classes can. A true hoarder class, you will collect tons of armors and weapons with fun, powerful, and sometimes just downright cool clicky and passive abilities. It's a long, hard journey, but pays off in the end. They also have a special mechanic called Berserk, where when they get low on HP, they just start racking up critical hits like crazy. Wizard. Role: DPS and transportation. Solo, very strong. Group, moderate. Raid, very strong. One of the two classes with access to fast travel spells that can transport your group around Norath. Aggro control can be difficult. Also, special note, they have quite a few stuns, which will help with crowd control, but generate an extremely high aggro. Raw, unadulterated damage at all stages of the game, both single target and AoE across several resistance types. Need buffs to solo well, but once you get them, it's an extremely powerful gold and XP farmer. Extremely strong in raids with their top-notch burst damage and aggro to match. Their aggro needs to be very carefully managed in both raids and groups. One unlucky nuke, dead wizard. Brings, unfortunately, little utility to a group outside of its many stuns, which, as stated, have massive aggro. And one of the two classes with a fast travel, which makes you highly desirable and friends of everyone. While not as proficient as druids in this aspect, it's still a very welcome ability, and you'll make friends just for having it. Rounding out the standard Holy Trinity, Cleric. Roles: healer, buffer, resurrection, more on that later. Solo, weak, with exceptions. Group, very strong. Raid, very strong. And special notes, solo goes from weak to very, very strong versus undead. The pure healing class of Everquest, with incredibly varied heals of varied power and utility, ranging from incredibly potent single target to AoE heals, debuff cleansing. They just bring the entire healer's toolkit to the table. They also have a very welcome HP and armor class buffs and the ever requested resurrection spells. More on that in just a moment. Very, very slow to solo with, but fairly safe because of their heals. The exception being undead areas such as Mistmoor or Unrest, where they become judge, jury, and executioner, along with their brothers in arms, paladins. With a nice line of undead nukes and heals and the ever funny yelp spell. The importance of resurrection cannot be overstated, as it restores lost XP to the target. and there is every chance in high traffic areas that you will make a goodly amount of platinum from res requests, to the point that you might have to turn D&D off because do not disturb, because you just can't handle the amount of people who are requesting reses for platinum. If the previous three were the Holy Trinity, this makes it the Holy Quadrality? Rogues, roll, DPS and stealth, solo, very weak, very, very weak. Group damage is strong, even in duos. Rage strong. The second they get a friend, rogues go from very, very weak to very strong. Note, performs way better when behind a target, the only class with access to poisons. And they can have safe fall, lockpicking, and stealth, making them very, very good scouts for checking for rares deeper in the dungeon. The Skulkers and Assassins of Norath, rogues, do it from behind. While behind a target, rogues do the highest sustained melee damage with the ability to pump out extremely strong bursts when needed. A bit weak during the launch era, they quickly rise in power as soon as Kunark, the first expansion, drops, when they get access to their, arguably, and it's only arguable if you really like to argue, easiest epic to obtain that quickly fixes the gaps in their DPS. The soul holders of the ability to craft and use poisons, they also provide a fairly unique playstyle if you enjoy crafting. Extremely potent as scouts, very good at retrieving corpses and using their top-notch stealth ability to get where NPCs really don't want you to be. Soloing, unfortunately, is a foregone conclusion, no matter your gear level. But they're very, very lovely in groups and raids. Monk. DPS, soft tank, puller. Solo, strong. Group, strong. Raid, strong. Some would argue very strong in all three of these categories. Special notes, they have a special armor and unarmed damage calculation that nobody in the game has access to. Monks are very unique in that they kind of break the rules of all the other pure melee classes. They're extremely competent soloers, very wanted in groups and dungeons and raids for their ability to pull, tank, and add considerable DPS. But they pay for this power with a couple of special restrictions, which could also be seen as special benefits. You have to keep your weight below a certain amount or you start taking massive hits to your avoidance. But as long as you stay below that amount, you have bonuses to your avoidance and mitigation. While they have the ability to wear a surprising amount of armor, it's usually ignored for their very special weight limit armor mechanic, with the exception of a few pieces of gear like fungi. Monks also have a special damage chart they use when unarmed, letting them be less gear reliant at launch, coupled with men with a very powerful self-heal, which lets them be less group reliant. Monks are arguably the best pullers in the game with their ability to feign death, making mobs think you're a stinky so they leave you alone, in case you pull poorly. Necromancer. Rolls, DPS, dots, crowd control, pets. Solo, very strong. Group setting, strong, and they kind of have a special relationship with raids. In raids, their primary function is to provide mana to healers and stronger nukers via the Twitch line of spells. Necromancers are a unique class in Everquest, and they have several very special social restrictions in the world. This has caused them to kind of play Everquest their own way, which some, including myself, find very interesting and fun. Necros do a large amounts of very mana-efficient damage over long periods of time via their dots, while having a pet to help them handle the incoming damage and add some of its own. The primary users of the infamous root rot and fear kiting solo methods, where you either root a target so it can't move and you dot it, or the fear kiting, which is where you fear the target, you snare the target, and you dot its pants off and it runs away from you dying. One of the few classes in EverQuest which are arguably better off solo than in groups while leveling, as what they do has little overlap in what a group can really offer you. And they get very unique farming locations that are extremely good, that can be detrimental to other classes, such as the farming bard NPCs. In a raid setting to provide dots and the ever helpful mana boost to other classes by twitching, named after its animation. Mage. Rolls, DPS, pets, and a unique item-based support system. Solo, vary to incredibly strong. Groups vary to incredibly strong. When raids, maintaining their strong presence. Have unique support and summoning vast amounts of useful items such as mana restoration items to eventually full suits of armor and weapons for lower level players, friends who are leveling alts, or hell, just equipping their own pets. And then another extremely unique class, if somewhat simple to play but unique in practice, Makes take summoning to an absolute insane degree. They summon pets, they summon deep AoE, they summon AoEs that are like sword stabbing people. And as stated, eventually full sets of armor, food, water. Primarily a DPS class, they have extremely powerful pets that support them by summoning gear for them. They have a pet for every occasion. They have a DPS pet with a damage return shield. They have a very tanky pet with a root. They have a tanky with high damage pet with a stun. They just have it all. Provide tons of player utility by summoning bandages, food, water, even weight reduction bags that allow classes like monks to maintain their weight limits. Very powerful solo and grouping, and have very decent raid potential, which starts to fall off a little bit, but then spikes back up once they start getting special pieces of gear that enhance their pets. The pets are so powerful at launch and for most of EverQuest's lifespan that they're often used as tanks for XP groups, and at a server launch, people will pester you for gear summons. You make some quick silver for spells if you're not greedy. Like for monks, however, they pay for this power by being incredibly overpopulated. Whenever it is not uncommon to see groups of 5 mages boxing, and the speedrunners tend to run all mage groups. Enchanter. CC, support, puller. CC being crowd control. Solo, very strong. Group, very strong. Raid, very strong. Provide extremely powerful caster support, and to be perfectly honest, Charming needs its own video, which Enchanters are the undisputed masters of. Enchanters are a very odd and very, very powerful duck in EverQuest. Almost a pure support class in every sense of the word, with the exception of lacking healing, and they have loads of buffs, debuffs, more crowd control than you can shake a stick at, and the ability to turn almost anything into any game into a short-term pet, and that's as strong and potentially dangerous as it sounds. They also have a very, very fun illusion line, which lets you travel almost anywhere in Norath largely unharassed. Fairly popular, but every group wants an Enchanter for obvious reasons. If there was an S tier in this game, Enchanter would probably fit the bill. Also required for jewel crafting, as they're the only class that can enchant metals for you to get magic jewelry. Druid. DPS, support, heals, travel. Solo strong, group strong, raid moderate. The kings of fast travel in EverQuest, and incredibly versatile. An extremely versatile class that can slot into a group with ease, Druids have respectable heals, respectable damage, and very high and in-demand buffs. They just so happen to be one of the best solo classes in the game, as the required buffs, as stated for Wizard, Druids carry all of them. Especially the ever-coveted Spirit of Wolf, otherwise known as So, that gives you a pair of Sketchers for the go fast. Many viable ways to farm platinum, such as root rotting, quad kiting, animal charming. One cannot stress enough how desirable Spirit of Wolf by itself is, let alone the ability to be a cosmic taxi of Norath. You can make decent money just sitting in a populated area selling buffs and teleportation services. This is so lucrative, in fact, I have never played on a server that does not have a dedicated Druid taxi guild. one can also not ignore that druids have something called evac, where if your raid is getting, or your group is getting ready to wipe, they have a spell line that transports you out of the zone to a safe area. Shaman, support, heals, pet. Solo, strong. Groups, extremely strong. Raid, very strong. Powerful, they're the melee support to Enchanter's caster support, with tons of trick and also sole access to the alchemy trades profession, which can provide decent plat. An incredibly powerful buffer and debuffer with nice heals and powerful dots to add to damage. Every melee class's best friend with its slow, haste, and it even comes with the very desirable Spirit of Wolf buff. The only class that can make potions, which, while bit of a time and platinum investment, can be extremely lucrative if you pay attention to it. Very safe, if somewhat slow solo, which should never be an issue, as every melee in the game will beg you to be his leveling partner. Has a unique line of spells called Cannibalize, which sacrifices health for mana, with then you just heal back, effectively giving Shaman infinite mana as long as they're paying attention. Easily one of the most desired classes in the game. Bit of a pain in the butt in raids, as you have to single target your buffs, but eventually you'll get raid-wide buffs. And they get quite a few unique pieces of gear, and all in all, just a very fun class. Paladin. Tank, heal, buffer, resurrection. Solo, weak with an exception. Group, very strong. And rage, strong. Paladins have a suite of Paladin-only gear, even to the point of there's Erudite Paladin-only gear. They become extreme. That caveat to their solo being weak is, like Cleric, they become Judge, Jury, and Executioner versus anything undead. Paladins, it's not uncommon for Paladins who are solo to stay in unrest for 20 levels. One of the hard tanks of the game, Paladins are a cross between a warrior and a cleric. They get resurrections, heals, and buffs as a cleric, but a bit weaker and later in levels. Have a surprising amount of decent crowd control with the blind spells, which at range acts almost like a fear, and they double as their own healer if there's none available. Painful to solo with, painfully slow that is, unless they're fighting undead, which they go completely Super Saiyan and just demolish everything. But they're fantastic group tanks, able to easily hold aggro and maintain their ever-precious red health bars. Even their aggro is special in that their primary way of generating aggro, which is self-heals and the blind spell, do not break crowd control. While never as desired as the Cleric version, Paladins will still get tells and platinum offers from players to resurrect them and gain back that very precious XP. Because Paladin res is still better than no res. Really, what makes Paladin stand apart is the Paladin-only gear, most of which has an anti-undead bent, which most consider a rite of passage. This makes them surprisingly easy to gear as well, as when good Paladin gear drops, it's only for Paladins. Also has the Lay on Hands ability, which can and will save entire raids by chunk healing somebody, and more important than yourself at the time. Shadowknight. Tank, DPS, dot, pooler. Solo, strong. Groups, very strong. Raid, strong. The edgy boys. That's... I couldn't think of any other note for them other than they're edgy, because, I mean, Shadowknights are so self-explanatory, really. The cross of a Necromancer and a Warrior, Shadowknights have a very fun set of playstyles to master. They turn Necromancer on its head by using the same spells, but almost backwards, and for completely different reasons. Shadowknights are extremely good group tanks that provide very good damage for a tanky class, or as one of the hard tanks, or are providing less group utility than their Paladin counterpart. Easily the best soloer of the hard tanks, as they have the ability to Fear Kite, which is when you fear your target, then you snare your target so it runs slower, and unlike Necromancer, which has to drop more mana, you just run behind it, you cave its head in with a sword. Easy, mana efficient, XP and plat. Has the ever deadly and infamous Harm's Touch, which, to put quite simply, is your I don't want to be in this fight anymore button that makes a monster faceplant. Ranger, one of the classes that are near and dear to my heart. DPS, support, soft tank. Their solo is strong, their group is strong, and their raid is moderate with a big caveat. They start off arguably one of the weakest classes in Norath, but they get progressively better as X-Packs come out, to the point that in some X-Packs they're arguably the best DPS you can get. They're a Druid Warrior hybrid that, like Paladin and Shadowknight, takes two classes and kind of turns their abilities on their head. Strong melee, and the god of bow damage in the game, and the ability to be a surprisingly good group tank. They solo and DPS in both in groups and raids. Rangers start off a bit rough, but gain continuous power jumps in X-Packs until they are extremely competitive. The primary bow users of the game, the Rangers offer a unique playstyle that no class can really replicate. They get Druid heals, Druid buffs, Druid nukes, but unfortunately lack the Druid transportation spells. They specialize in hunting animals outdoor for loot and XP and are by far the most powerful trackers in the game, able to zone in, hit track, and just tell where everything in the zone is at your will for your group to exploit. Use these to hunt big game. Bard, support, puller, crowd control. Solo, weak, used to be very strong. Unfortunately, they lost their ability to solo. Group, very strong. Raids, very strong. They're kind of hard to place in a single category as they're so versatile, and really bards need their own video to properly explain, as do all the classes. Bards are really hard to explain. They have really bad DPS, their ability to tank is questionable, complete lack of heals, and sadly very poor solo ability. And I really miss swarm kiting. Where bards come into their own is the absolutely massive amount of manaless buffs and debuffs they have access to, as well as an incredible suite of support abilities such as tracking, stealth, lockpicking, health regen, not healing regen, mana regen, stamina regen. Bards don't add a whole lot to the fight themselves, but turn every other class up to 11. They're also by far the fastest class in a game for raw on-foot travel speed, if that matters to you. It matters to me. And have access to an illusion equipment set and songs that let you get places no one else can really get safely, making this, if you're an explorer, this is the class for you. Raids never have enough bards because of their bad boy resist songs. You will see them often box as they can unfortunately be macroed to a reasonable level via the melody command, but the difference between a macroed bard and a main bard really hardcore focusing is extraordinary. Tied for the best pullers in the game, and they have access to abilities that nobody else can even come close to replicating. And that is my short and hopefully sweet guide to Everquest classes for a TLP server launch. It's my first constructed video, so I hope it wasn't too terrible. If you did like it, please hit subscribe and the bell icon. I will be making much more content in the future. I would like to do an individual video on each class, going much more in depth. I would also like to do a deity and a race guide for Everquest. And I would also like to produce just more content for the game in general. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to keep up to date, like I said, subscribe, bell icon. We also have a link to our Discord, Occasional Synergy, which is a multi-game guild where you're currently playing lots of Path of Exile. I hope to see you again in the future.